I just got a new lip gloss. It is making me feel like it is 2003 again, which is weird. Hey folks, my name is Jen, and today, or tonight, if you can tell the lighting is kind of intense, we are going to discuss the books that I read in July. My voice, I'm going to apologize for it now if I'm speaking a little low or if I sound like a little off or something. I screamed, sang, and talked a hell of a lot this past weekend because we were on like little mini vacay. And also I don't know if I'm getting a cold or is my allergies driving me absolutely bonkers, but I sound not great right now, so sorry. I'm actually going to very much try to be actually quick this time because of, again, my voice, and I don't have that much battery. So, here we go. This month I read 6 books. I know, that seems to be the number this year, is just reading 6 books in a month. I don't know what that is. It's weird. I'm usually all over the place. Let's get into the books that I did read. The first of these was Nora Roberts. Northern Lights by Nora Roberts. This is a book featuring Nate Ignatius. I love that name. I didn't realize that I loved that name until I read this book. Anyway, Nate is a cop. He was on, I think it was the Chicago PD, but I could be wrong. But anyway, he and his partner ended up getting into this firefight with some bad guy. I can't remember the circumstances, but his partner was unfortunately killed. And Nate is dealing with a lot of survivor's guilt, I think, and he's also dealing a lot with the fact that, like, he basically watched his partner bleed out, which is really tough. He's blaming himself. His marriage fell apart. Like, just shit's been bad for him, so he ends up deciding to take a post as the new chief of police in the very small town of Lunacy up in Alaska. And he is the first official police chief that they are having up there since this town was incorporated in, like, I think the 70s. I want to say the 70s or 80s. And so he's having to get used to the very interesting, quirky characters that inhabit the town. One of these quirky characters is Meg. She is a bush pilot. She basically flies a plane and goes back and forth bringing supplies and necessary equipment, not only to the town of Lunacy, but she has other jobs that she flies for as well. And the two form kind of a flirtatious friendship, and then, you know, more. There's also a mystery that is uncovered at the same time. So this book, Nate and Meg, I really loved their relationship. I enjoyed their flirtation. I liked their the kind of relationship that developed between them over the time. I also really enjoyed Alaska in general. The descriptions of Alaska were breathtaking. It reminded me again that is on my bucket list. Specifically, seeing the Aurora Borealis in Alaska is on my bucket list, but I'd just like to go to Alaska anyway, because it sounds absolutely gorgeous and just weird, and I'm all for seeing really weird places. The descriptions of Alaska and life there, very interesting. The characters in town, really quirky, really kind of bizarre, and they kind of grow on you after a while, and I really enjoyed all of them. They're very interesting, very weird community, but I really enjoyed getting to know them over the course of the book. And in this one, there's definitely a lot more at stake here than there is in a lot of her other books. Like, she really excels, I think, at making romance novels where the romance is definitely a huge part of it. Like, that's a big thing. And there's usually a lot of steamy scenes and stuff like that, and the characters are really cute. But this one, it just felt like there was a hell of a lot more stake than normal. The steamy bits didn't happen until much later in the book. I would say much later than they normally happen in romance novels in general, or even in some of her other books. There is an active, like, murderer roaming around this book. It's not just like a stalker or creepy things are happening, like I talked about in like Tribute or anything. There's actually like someone actively murdering. In this novel, things are higher stakes, and it was honestly a little bit more creepier than some of her others. Definitely lent more into the mystery element than the romance for most of this. The one thing about Nora Roberts is that she often has a very metaphorical take on her steamy scenes. She often uses the strangest ways of talking about a sex scene. It's not really like anything else I've read where people are either almost clinical or using the funniest words for anatomy, or just, you know, things that are actually kind of titillating. Hers are steamy, but again, she just has this way of putting things that makes it more metaphorical. She talks a lot about waves and light and shadows and stuff. It's a lot. It's quite honestly laughable. I actually usually laugh at least once during one of her overly dramatic scenes that she has in here, but at the same time, they're still fun. Still a lot of fun. And yeah, I really enjoy the action, the mystery elements, the relationship between the characters, Nate and Meg, their banter and everything. I loved it. So let me see. I'm using my review thing now, and there's a space for favorite quotes, so let me read you one of my favorite quotes from here. This is Nate talking with one of his deputies in the PD. He looked around when he heard a window rattling roar. Earthquake? Volcano? Nuclear war? Beaver, Peter told him. I don't care if it is Alaska. You don't have beavers big enough to sound like that. With an appreciative laugh, Peter gestured to the window. Meg Galloway's plane. It's a beaver. I gave this book 5 stars. Ooh, one thing I will note about this, there is a very descriptive piece of animal cruelty in here, just to warn you. Another book that I read this month was The Girl Who Loved Tom Gordon by Stephen King. This is following 9-year-old Trisha. Her family has been going through a rough patch. Her parents are getting a divorce, and her brother and her have been mostly living with their mom, who's kind of moved them away from Massachusetts. They are now living in, I think they're living in Maine or New Hampshire. And her mom has dragged her and her teenage brother out on this hike on the Maine and New Hampshire branch of the Appalachian Trail. Unfortunately, at one point, Trisha gets separated from her arguing brother and mother, and so ends up lost in the woods. As time goes on, she feels that she is being stalked by something in the woods. She has a Walkman where she listens to baseball games on to keep her company, and after a while she starts imagining that her favorite Red Sox player, Tom Gordon, is kind of like a little guardian angel to her, and following her around, helping to protect her while she is trying to find her way out of the woods. So this was very unsettling the whole way through. I wouldn't say this is the most terrifying of his novels. In fact, I wouldn't call it really very scary at all, but it does have a major creep factor. There is a pretty descriptive, gory bit at one point, so if you don't do well with that, keep that in mind. While it's not terrifying, it's not overly nightmare inducing, I don't think, like some of his other novels. It is just utterly unsettling the entire time. Like you feel like not fully okay the entire time you're reading this. I did not read this at night because I don't hate myself. So, overall, I would say that I'm not a big baseball person. I've been to a couple of games, like minor league games, and I do root for the Red Sox. I mean, you can't live in Massachusetts and not, to be honest. But yes, I've never been like an overly enthusiastic baseball person. I don't mind, I like it when I'm there at the game, but it's not one of those things that I enjoy watching on TV or anything. Stephen King has like this ability to make me very interested in baseball, and that's something that I found in one of the short stories that he, in his Nightmares and Dreamscapes collection that I read a few years ago, also made me very interested in, I think that was about Little League. I think he was writing about like it was a non-fiction one, I think, about like his son's Little League experience and stuff. And yeah, he makes baseball for, if you are not like a super sports person, he makes it interesting. I honestly didn't really know anything about Tom Gordon before I read this the first time. I did end up looking up information about him after I finished reading this. But yeah, he made baseball interesting. There's definitely, like I said, it's very unsettling. There's like a very interesting theme going on through here that I don't think I quite really spent a lot of time thinking about the first time I was reading it several years ago. But it's just kind of an interesting theme here with the sub-audible, I guess, are just figuring out what, is something out there. Something's out there. Do you know what it is? No. Does it really matter what it is, other than just knowing that there's something holding the universe together? But yeah, I found that to be just very interesting, just kind of confronting like what is the, as Trisha and her dad calls it, the sub-audible, trying to keep hope, facing yourself and your fears, when you're alone with yourself and your fears, and like a supreme will to live. Of course, there's all the usual like colloquialisms and pop culture things, and just these particular little things that I think of as Kingisms. Just certain things that tend to come up a lot in a lot of his books. These little things that he, just phrases or stuff that he tends to put into his books a lot that I always kind of enjoy. I know some people find them annoying. I kind of enjoy them. But yeah, overall, I really enjoyed this reread. I had a good time with it. Here's I marked a lot of stuff, but here's one of my favorite quotes. Trisha burst into tears. She pushed the power button on the Walkman and then just sat there in the damp ground with her back against the tree trunk and her legs spread and the blue poncho hung in between them in its hula skirt tatters. She cried harder than she had since first realizing for sure she was lost, but this time she cried in relief. She was lost but would be found. She was sure of it. Tom Gordon had gotten the save, and so would she. So one of the other books that I ended up reading in July was Common Sense by Thomas Paine. This was one of these like books that he wrote basically during the Revolutionary War. Thomas Paine himself was an Englishman, and he kind of came over from England, and he befriended a lot of like the founding fathers, and was pretty involved in the revolution itself. He already had kind of a reputation over in England for being saying some extremely inflammatory things about the monarchy and King George in particular, which, funnily enough, folks, but Mad King George, like King George of infamy, the Revolutionary War, who's also Mad King George, who, you know, has that, you know, You'll Be Back song from Hamilton, that is the same George that is featured in Bridgerton, the Queen Charlotte story. So, just everyone who's saying Farmer George is really hot, remember, he basically was like, yo, you fall in line or I'll fucking murder your families. So, just, girlies, when you think about it, keep that in mind. History's fucking wild, man. So this was one of the things I think that got me the most interested in the Revolutionary War back when I was in junior high. I think part of what I really loved about this back in the day was because this was basically Thomas Paine's way of saying fuck you to the monarchy. And as an angsty, like, 14-year-old, anyone that basically told an authority figure to go fuck off was like a god in my mind. I was like, hell yeah, let's do it, bro. So that's what I really liked about this. Also, I think the writing was very different than stuff that I had normally been into or read up until that point, so I think that was part of the appeal as well. Now I do have to say that I do have like a little bit of qualms, I guess, with some of the things he said. Mostly because I think some of what he had to say was maybe better in theory than in practice, or maybe would work better in theory than in practice, really, so far as we can see. I see that they took a lot of what he said and kind of used that in trying to form how our government works and stuff like that, but so that was also very interesting to look at. He himself was an interesting person, so there's like a whole introduction section that has to do with him, so there's like a breakdown of what he like said and the meaning behind a lot of what he wrote about in here, and then there's also more background on him, what is known about him. There's also a book about him, which I would like to read at some point. So it's just a lot of good background information, which is key, honestly, to knowing more about Thomas Paine, the person, and everything. His final resting place is potentially questionable. It sounds like they might have lost his body, which that's creepy. I don't know. It's kind of, he had a pretty unfortunate end for someone who was part of like helping us become like a stand up to you know, English monarchy and like become a nation. So that kind of sucks that he didn't have a great end to his life in general. So I don't know. It was an interesting thing to revisit. I did capture some of that, like, feeling of, holy shit, he said that? Fuck! Like that kind of thing. I'll share with you a couple of my favorite quotes from here, because a lot of the beginning is really Thomas Paine just sticking it the fuck to King George. Just full-blown criticism. And that's the whole point of it, is him criticizing and breaking down why monarchy is stupid, and then going into what's been done to the colonies, and then going into why we need to focus, instead of negotiating with these assholes, becoming our own nation. and just kind of breaking down that whole thing and how that could come about and stuff like that. So it's like a, I don't know, I guess think of it like someone's dissertation paper or something. Yeah, things about Thomas Paine. He produced editorials arguing for more lenient divorce laws, humane treatment for animals, an end to dueling, justice for women, and the eradication of slavery. So, pretty interesting dude overall. So there's a quote in the introduction that I enjoyed. It said, "We attempt to honor at once the values of equality and freedom, but these values can only coexist in tension with one another. As many observers of American life have ironically noted, it can sometimes seem that our political parties conspire to divide the nation's moral capital between them." Damn. A couple of my favorite quotes from the work in general. There's a lot of good shit in here. This part is when he's like breaking down monarchical I can't pronounce that shit. Monarchical tyranny. He's talking about how the British like government system, which I don't fully understand completely, but there's like the Commons, and then there's other, like, at this point the royal family is like a figurehead, but there's like the House of Commons and the House of Lords, right? And I think Commons is like the regular Jews and the Lords are the nobility, aristocracy, right? If you are from England or you know more about how that works, please correct me, because these are things that I picked up or inferred from here and from watching Britcoms incessantly. So, yeah, just correct me if I'm wrong. But this says, to say the Commons is a check upon the king presupposes two things. First, that the king is not to be trusted without being looked after, or in other words, that a thirst for absolute power is the natural disease of monarchy. Further down he says, there is something exceedingly ridiculous in the composition of monarchy. It first excludes the man from the means of information, yet empowers him to act in cases where the highest judgment is required. The state of a king shuts him from the world, yet the business of a king requires him to know it thoroughly. Wherefore the different parts, by unnaturally opposing and destroying each other, prove the whole character to be absurd and useless. He quotes the Bible a lot. He had a background in, like, I think he was a Quaker. So he has a background of that. This quote is, England, since the conquest, hath known some few good monarchs, but groaned beneath a much larger number of bad ones. Yet no man in his senses can say that their claim under William the Conqueror is a very honourable one. A French bastard landing with an armed banditti and establishing himself King of England against the consent of the natives is in plain terms a very paltry, rascally original. Certainly hath no divinity in it. Because at that point he's trying to argue that, like, a big thing about royalty, I don't know if that holds true for now at all, but back in the day, they would, like, try to say, well, obviously my blood's better than yours, so some people are born to rule and some people are born to be ruled over. Like, that whole thing, and they argue that, well, God ordained it, so therefore, you know, pick my wheat and tithe for me and all that shit. Stuff like how they used to have it at the time. I know, I guess I hadn't realized before this that was also a thing in England. I knew that was a thing in France for a little bit there because of, I think, the Sun King. My French history is also, like, messed up. I take this from, like, little bits that I've heard or read in places. Part of the ending as well, he was, like, laying out how to become, like, a country unto ourselves kind of thing. We'd have to do that by making allies with other countries and kind of just getting away from England, but, like, allying ourselves with, like, I guess France, and like Spain and stuff, and making like setting up trade routes and like that kind of thing, and trying to find a common ground. And one of those quotes that I really, I don't know, I just kind of sat with afterwards, was part of the last paragraph in the book. Wherefore, instead of gazing at each other with suspicious or doubtful curiosity, let each of us hold out to his neighbor a hearty hand of friendship, and unite in drawing a line which, like an act of oblivion, shall bury in forgetfulness every former dissension. Let the names of Whig and Tory be extinct, and let none other be heard among us than those of a good citizen, an open and resolute friend, and a virtuous supporter of the rights of mankind and of the free and independent states of America. I think he was a little bit of an idealist, but I don't think that's necessarily a bad thing. But yeah, I didn't mind this reread. It took me a little bit to get into it, but once I really got into it, I flew through it. As you can see, I didn't like full annotate. I basically just tabbed and highlighted passages that I enjoyed, or that made me go, oh shit, he said that. Yeah, so that was that. I ended up giving this 4 stars. And then the last 3 books that I read over the course of the month were the first 3 books in the Percy Jackson series. So that was The Lightning Thief, The Sea of Monsters, and The Titan's Curse. Percy Jackson is, if you didn't know, it is a series following the main character, Percy. He's a good kid, but he's always struggled. He has gone through a lot of schools, a lot of boarding schools. Things always just seem to happen around him, and he usually gets blamed for those things, which is really unfortunate. He is honestly about to be kicked out of yet another school, but he has another problem, and that is that mythological creatures just seem to be showing up around him and trying to kill him. And he finds out that the reason for this is that he is a half-blood. His mother, who he loves more than anything in the world, is a human, but his father, who he has never met and abandoned them, basically, is a god, like a Greek god. And that makes Percy a demigod. And once Percy is, like, still trying to grapple with this, he finds that he's been pulled into a pretty big mess because Zeus, the, like, king of all the gods, thinks that Percy has stolen his lightning bolts, and he desperately wants them back. So Percy and his friends are on a quest. Sea of Monsters, Titan's Curse, different quests, different things that are happening. There's a big underlying, like, subplot that basically the big baddies are on the rise, and it's all gearing up for the final stand down in book 5. So this has been my 3rd time reading this series. I think my 4th. I think my 3rd time reading this series. And I have been really enjoying it. I'm currently paused in Battle of the Labyrinth. I was hoping to finish the whole, like, Percy Jackson series, reread, as well as the Demigod Files by the end of July, but that just didn't work out because I've just been distracted. So that's where I'm currently at right now. But for these 3 books, enjoyed them. Lightning Thief, I'm always usually a sucker for the intro book to a fantasy series. There's just something so interesting about discovering this whole new world and everything, and that's still how I feel about The Lightning Thief. I really enjoy this introduction. There's a couple of things that Percy says and does in here that just make me crack up so much, and like I'm digging his energy entirely. This was 5 stars because I enjoyed the intro, I enjoyed his sass, I enjoyed everything. Sea of Monsters. The thing about the Sea of Monsters is I think it's suffering a little bit from book number 2 syndrome. It's just, things feel slightly rushed, and it doesn't quite grab attention as much as the first book, but it's still not that bad. I did give it like 4 stars. I felt a lot more emotions about this one, I think, than I had last time. The Titan's Curse. This is the tough one to get through, because there's some tough things that happen in this book, but still lots of emotion. I may have teared up, and yeah, I really enjoyed getting back into this as well. And I liked the introduction of the Pegasi, or there being more Pegasi. Love it. Love a couple of the creatures in here and everything. And this was also 5 stars. So yeah, so far this reread, I'm loving it. I love Percy. I love his sass, his sarcasm, and his personal voice in this series. He's like the best part of the series, and that's why this wins out for me more, I think, than the Heroes of Olympus, just because I love his sarcasm and stuff. But yeah, so that, my friends, was everything that I read in July. It wasn't as much as I was hoping, but it was still something. So can't fully complain. Let me know how your guys' month was down below. Thank you so much for watching. I'm sorry, my battery's gonna die. Thank you so much for watching. Thank you for always watching. If you're new here, please consider subscribing, and I will see you next time. Bye.